The dust-choked air of the marketplace reeked of sweat and desperation. Cale Draven moved through the crowd, focused only on his mission. Then he saw her, a chained alien girl, eyes pleading from beneath matted hair. "Please," she whispered. "Can you buy me and take me as your slave?" Her words hung in the air, a moral grenade waiting to detonate everything Cale thought he knew about survival in this sector. The air in the bazaar tasted of overheated metal and something sweetly rotten. Cale moved through the press of bodies, ignoring the merchants calling out their questionable wares. He kept his hands near his sidearm and his eyes scanning. The navigation module sat in a display case 3 stalls ahead, gleaming under flickering lights. He had exactly 73 credits left after refueling. The module would cost 60. Without it, his freighter was just a metal tomb grounded on this rock. A cage rattled against stone to his right. 4-limbed creatures with gray skin huddled together behind bars. Their eyes followed the passing crowd without hope. This sector operated beyond Dominion patrol routes. Law meant whatever the highest bidder could enforce. Survival here required ignoring things that didn't concern you. Cale had learned that lesson on 3 different frontier worlds. The stench of unwashed bodies and chemical waste clung to his clothes. He pushed past a group of haggling traders. Their argument over the price of water filters faded behind him. His boots scuffed against stone worn smooth by countless footsteps. The module vendor stood behind a counter patched together from scrap metal. The old man's face showed the leathery texture of someone who'd spent too long under twin suns. Cale's path took him along the slave pens. Different species occupied each enclosure. Some stared blankly at the ground while others gripped the bars with desperate intensity. Their shackles showed recent wear, the metal still bright against worn skin. He kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, mentally counting his credits again. The module's blue light called to him from across the marketplace. He could almost feel the freighter's controls responding to a proper navigation system. No more guessing at jump coordinates or risking blind transitions. This purchase meant freedom from this dustball world and its grim economy. Then movement caught his peripheral vision. A smaller pen stood slightly apart from the others. The being inside wasn't like the rest. Her bindings looked newer, tighter against thin wrists. She wasn't shouting or begging like the others. She simply watched him approach with eyes that held too much understanding for this place. He took another step toward the module vendor. His hand went to the credit chip in his pocket. The numbers lined up perfectly in his mind. Module, fuel, supplies. A clean transaction. A clear exit, everything balanced. Her eyes met his as he passed. They held no accusation, only a quiet intensity that made his steps falter. The module could wait another moment. Something about her isolation from the other captives suggested a different story. Something that didn't fit the normal slave market patterns. His boot scuffed against a loose stone. The sound echoed faintly against the market's constant noise. When he looked back at her, she had risen to her knees despite the restraints. The module vendor called out a greeting, but Cale's attention had already shifted. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the crowd. But he saw the shape of them. A request, a plea. The navigation module suddenly felt less important than whatever truth hid behind those eyes. Her eyes held his without blinking. They showed no fear, only a calm awareness that seemed out of place against the rusted chains and filthy straw. This girl was smaller than the other captives, her frame slender beneath rough-spun clothing. Her bindings were different too, tighter around the wrists with newer metal that hadn't yet acquired the patina of long use. She knelt in clean straw, separated from the other prisoners by a gap just wide enough to signal different treatment. The air between them seemed to still as she spoke. "Please." Her voice carried clearly despite the market's noise. She used common trade tongue with perfect articulation, each word formed with care. "Can you buy me and take me as your slave?" The question hung between them, a paradox wrapped in desperation. Her grammar was flawless, her accent educated. This wasn't the broken pidgin most slaves used. Cale had seen many things in frontier markets. He'd watched beings traded for scrap metal, for fuel, for passage off dying worlds. But he'd never heard a request like this. The clarity of her speech suggested former status, perhaps even education. Slaves who spoke this well usually came from positions of privilege before their capture. They understood language as power, even in chains. Her plea wasn't about wanting ownership. It was about choosing the lesser evil. She was asking for slavery to escape something worse. Cale's eyes scanned her surroundings again. The separate pen, The cleaner conditions, the guarded position away from other prisoners, these were the signs of a specialty item, something reserved for particular buyers. He felt the weight of his credit chip in his pocket. 73 credits, enough for the navigation module and basic supplies. Not enough for a slave, especially not one kept apart like this. The mathematics of survival said walk away. His hand moved toward the chip automatically, fingers brushing against the cool plastic, then he stopped. Her eyes hadn't left his face. They held no expectation, only a quiet assessment. She wasn't begging like the others. She was stating a logical proposition. Buy me now or something worse happens later. The calculation was cold, precise, and utterly terrifying in its implications. The module vendor called his name again, impatient. Time was currency here too. Every moment spent deciding cost opportunities elsewhere. Kale's training said complete the mission. Get the module, get off-world, survive another day. But his hand remained at his pocket, not retrieving the chip. She leaned forward slightly, chains whispering against stone. They come for me at sunset. The words were barely audible, meant for him alone. Her gaze flickered toward the western edge of the market where the sun already dipped toward the horizon. The movement was subtle, but the meaning clear. This wasn't just about slavery. It was about timing. Kale's fingers tightened around the credit chip. The numbers no longer added up the same way. The module represented his freedom, but this being represented someone else's survival. His hand came out of his pocket empty. The transaction would have to wait. First, he needed to understand what exactly was happening here, and why this particular captive warranted such specific arrangements. The shop carried the scent of wet iron and something chemical beneath, sweet like rotting fruit. Zorak stood behind a counter made from reclaimed ship plating, his fingers tracing inventory lists on a cracked datapad. He looked up as Kale approached, eyes calculating weight and worth. This merchant dealt in scarcity, his prices reflecting not just value but the exact measure of a buyer's need. She's Yan, Zorak said without greeting, last confirmed survivor of her species. The Dominion cleared their homeworld 6 cycles back. His voice held the flat tone of someone discussing merchandise, not people. He named a figure that made Kale's remaining credits seem like pocket change. The number hung between them, deliberately impossible. Kale had seen markets like this before, places where rarity trumped morality, where beings became collectibles for wealthy patrons. Some buyers sought endangered species as status symbols, others for their unique biological properties. The Yan's empathic abilities were legendary, making them equally valued and feared. Zorak saw only profit potential, not the conscious being in the cage. The merchant's fingers tapped against his datapad. I have 3 offers already, 1 from a research facility, 2 from private collectors. He leaned forward, his breath carrying the same chemical sweetness that permeated the shop. They understand the value of owning the last of something. Kale's hand went to his hip. The blaster rested there, its weight familiar against his palm. He'd carried it through 7 firefights, 3 border crossings, and that ugly business on Tau Station. The weapon represented more than protection. It was his ability to control outcomes in uncontrollable situations. He placed it on the counter between them. The metal made a solid sound against the scrap plating. Zorak's eyes didn't widen, but his calculation changed. He picked up the blaster, testing its balance with practiced hands. Modified TR-7, he murmured. Well maintained. His fingers found the wear patterns near the grip, the slight discoloration where Kale's hand had rested through countless hours. The merchant understood what he was really buying, not just a weapon, but a piece of someone's survival instinct. They completed the transaction with minimal words. Zorax handed over the ownership chip for the Yan female, his movements efficient. As Kale turned to leave, the merchant's voice stopped him. The Dominion has been asking about humans lately, Zorax said. His eyes held new interest now, studying Kale's features with fresh attention. Increased patrols, more questions at checkpoints. They're particularly interested in solo operators with freighters. The warning hung in the chemical-scented air, another transaction of sorts. Information for whatever future business might come from this unusual human who traded his protection for a doomed alien. The blaster left his hand without hesitation. 7 times it had saved him. The bandit ambush near the methane flats, the docking bay dispute on New Perth, 5 other moments where survival balanced on trigger pressure. The weapon felt lighter than its mass, heavy with memory. Its absence created a physical void at his hip, like missing a limb. Survivalists understand weapon surrender differently than civilians. Studies of frontier psychology show that for those who live by armed self-reliance, relinquishing a trusted firearm induces measurable stress responses, elevated heart rate, tactical disorientation, heightened risk assessment. The weapon becomes extension of self, control manifest in molded polymer and charged energy cells. Kale felt the loss immediately, his right hand twitching toward empty space where certainty had rested. Zorax's smile showed thin, sharp teeth. He understood the transaction's true value. He hadn't just acquired a quality firearm. He'd taken a piece of the man's operational confidence. The merchant's fingers caressed the blaster's barrel as he placed it beneath the counter. His eyes held the satisfied gleam of someone who collects weaknesses as well as objects. The ownership chip changed hands, a small data sliver that meant everything. Kale's fingers closed around it. The metal felt cold against his palm. He had traded his primary defense for a responsibility he didn't fully understand. The mathematics of survival had been rewritten in moments, and now he operated with different variables. He didn't move toward the exit. Instead, he placed his remaining credits on the counter. 13 chips, barely enough for a decent meal. Supplies, he said. The word hung between them, redefining everything. This wasn't about purchasing property anymore. Zorax raised an eyebrow but didn't question. He produced a compact survival kit, water purification tablets, nutrient bars, a basic medical spray. Standard emergency rations, nothing special. Kale shook his head. Real food. And something for her to wear that isn't rags. His voice carried an edge that hadn't been there during the weapon negotiation. The merchant's smile faded slightly. He disappeared into the back and returned with dried fruit, proper meal packs, and a folded garment of sturdy blue fabric. The items were clearly from his personal stock, not standard market fare. The cost exceeded Kale's remaining credits, but Zorax didn't mention the difference. Perhaps he understood that some transactions transcend accounting. Kale gathered the supplies, his movements deliberate. The package felt substantial in his arms, tangible evidence that this purchase wasn't about ownership. Food, water, clothing. These were provisions for a person, not maintenance for property. The blaster's absence seemed less significant when balanced against the weight of these necessities. He turned toward the pen where the Yan female waited. The ownership chip felt warm in his hand now, its meaning transformed. He wasn't carrying a title to property anymore. He was carrying someone's chance at dignity. The marketplace continued around them, its commerce unchanged. But Kale's participation in that economy had fundamentally shifted. Aaliyah felt his approach like a shift in atmospheric pressure. She still knelt in the clean straw, her chains loose now that the transaction was complete. Her people's empathy wasn't metaphor or vague intuition. It was biological fact as real as breathing. Emotions registered to her like thermal signatures, each feeling possessing distinct heat and texture. The Dominion had initially valued this ability, using Yan as living sensors during negotiations and interrogations. But when her people began sensing the corruption within Dominion leadership itself, their utility became threat. She watched Kale return from the merchant's stall. His emotional state reached her before he'd taken 3 steps. Sharp frustration about the weapon's loss, layered over deeper concern about his own vulnerability. Beneath that, something warmer, genuine protective intention toward her. Most beings projected chaotic emotional noise, but his patterns were remarkably focused. She felt his internal debate about next steps, the tactical calculations running beneath surface concerns. "We should," he began, but she was already rising. "Move quickly," she finished softly. Her voice held no urgency, only certainty. She'd felt his decision to leave the market immediately, the moment it formed in his mind. Concealment was impossible for her species. Deception caused physical discomfort, like holding one's breath too long. Their biology made them honest in ways other species found unnerving. This empathic gift had been both blessing and curse throughout Yan history. In fiction, empathic species often face persecution, their abilities either coveted as tools or feared as weapons. Her people had experienced both. The Dominion first classified them as assets, then as threats when they couldn't be fully controlled. Now they were simply targets for eradication. She accepted the bundle of supplies he offered, Her fingers brushed his, and she felt the sudden spike of his surprise at her touch. Human skin felt different than she'd expected, warmer with rougher texture. She also felt his slight embarrassment about the clothing's simplicity, his concern about whether the food would be adequate. This ability could still serve positive purpose. Some Yan had used their empathy to unite refugees, sensing shared hopes beneath surface differences. Others had helped negotiate peace between conflicting groups. But these applications required freedom her people no longer possessed. For surviving Yan, empathy mostly meant sensing approaching danger moments before it arrived. She felt the exact moment his mission parameters shifted completely. The navigation module was forgotten now, replaced by determination to get her to safety. His priorities rearranged themselves in real time, the change as tangible to her as if he'd spoken it aloud. The protective impulse solidified into resolve, pushing aside earlier uncertainties. They moved toward the market's exit. Her empathy expanded their awareness beyond normal senses. She felt the merchant's satisfaction fading into calculation as he watched them leave. She sensed the indifferent fatigue of most market-goers, focused on their own survival. But threading through the crowd were sharper, more focused presences. Dominion informants, their attention like searchlights sweeping the area. Kale placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, guiding her through the crowd. The contact wasn't possessive but protective. She felt his heightened alertness, the way he cataloged every face, every uniform, every potential threat. They were two separate targets now. A human drawing increased. Dominion interest in the last known Yan. Their vulnerabilities, multiplied together rather than canceling. Out the marketplace's noise seemed to sharpen around them. Every exchanged glance carried potential danger. Every uniformed figure became a possible threat. They moved with purpose. Two beings who had been independent problems moments before, now fused into a single crisis waiting to happen. The exit loomed ahead, but the distance felt greater than its physical measurement. Zorax's warning echoed in Kale's mind as they rejoined the marketplace flow. The Dominion asking about humans. No random inquiry, this felt systematic, deliberate. Authoritarian regimes never reveal their full intentions immediately. They test boundaries first, incrementally expanding control until opposition becomes impossible. Humans had enjoyed relative freedom along the frontier, but that neutrality clearly concerned someone in power. Kale felt exposed in the crowd. His lack of sidearm created a constant awareness of vulnerability. Every uniformed guard seemed to look his way a moment too long. Each Dominion insignia stood out like a warning beacon. He kept his shoulders slightly hunched, making himself less noticeable. The slave purchase had been a visible transaction in a place where watchers recorded everything. Solo operators survived through anonymity. They moved between systems without attracting notice, their value lying in being unseen and unremarkable. This transaction had broken that fundamental rule. Buying the last Yan would register on someone's reports. Combined with sudden Dominion interest in humans, the equation turned dangerous. He'd become a person of interest when his entire survival strategy relied on being nobody. A guard's gaze lingered on them near the spice merchant's stall. The man's eyes tracked their movement with professional assessment. Kale felt the weight of that attention like physical pressure. He guided Aaliyah slightly left, using a group of arguing traders as cover. Her hand felt small in his, but her steps matched his pace perfectly. She sensed the danger, too. He could feel her awareness like a hum in the air between them. The market's main thoroughfare offered the fastest route out, but also the most exposure. Dominion patrols moved along it regularly, their polished boots marking rhythm against worn stone. Kale chose instead to push through the narrower passages between stalls. The crowd thickened here, bodies pressing close in the confined space. The air grew heavy with the smell of unwashed cloth and cooking oil. He pulled his hood lower, shadowing his features. The motion felt too obvious, like every nervous fugitive in every low-budget thriller. But sometimes clichés worked because they addressed real needs. Concealment mattered more than originality here. Aaliyah moved closer to his side, her slight frame nearly disappearing beside him in the press of bodies. They reached a junction where three alleyways met. The main flow of traffic moved toward the spaceport. Sensible, logical direction for anyone wanting to leave. Kale hesitated. Straight lines became predictable. Dominion security would expect fleeing suspects to take the most direct route. Their procedures would prioritize monitoring departure points. He turned instead toward the industrial quarter, The crowd thinned immediately as they moved against the human tide. Workers in grease-stained coveralls gave them curious looks. Machinery sounds grew louder, the grind of processors, the hiss of pneumatic tools. This area felt grittier, more functional than the market's commercial zones. The air carried the tang of ozone and lubricants. Their new direction offered better cover but slower progress. The industrial maze twisted in unpredictable patterns, forcing them to double back twice when paths ended at sealed warehouse doors. Aaliyah's breathing remained steady beside him, but he felt the increased tension in her grip. She knew this deviation from the expected route signaled deeper danger than mere marketplace anxiety. Cale spotted a Dominion patrol rounding a corner ahead. 3 guards moving in coordinated formation, their helmets scanning left and right. No casual inspection, this was targeted searching. He pulled Aaliyah into a recessed doorway, their bodies pressed against cold metal. The patrol passed without glancing their way, but the message was clear. The net was already closing. Standard escape routes would be monitored. They needed alternatives nobody would anticipate. A woman stepped from the shadow of a coolant pipe, her movement smooth like water finding its path. Sarah's bronze skin showed years under this system's twin suns, her eyes holding the steady assessment of someone who knew which threats mattered. She didn't look surprised to see them. Her gaze took in Cale's protective stance, the way his body sheltered the Yan girl, the absence of a weapon at his hip. These details told their own story better than any confession. Resistance movements throughout history have always watched for turning points. They look for moral actions that reveal character. The merchant who hides refugees, the soldier who disobeys orders, the stranger who risks everything for someone else's survival. These moments become recruitment opportunities. Sarah had been observing the slave market for hours, noting who bought, who sold, who looked away. Cale's transaction with Zorax had stood out like a beacon. "Welcome to the resistance," she said. Her voice carried no dramatic weight, only simple statement of fact. She might have been commenting on the weather. The phrase wasn't inspirational. It was acknowledgement. She'd expected someone like him eventually. The Dominion's tightening grip created resistors through sheer pressure, like tectonic plates creating mountains through collision. This wasn't random assistance. Sarah's appearance demonstrated organized response. She moved with purpose, her steps confident through the industrial maze. She knew which surveillance cameras were malfunctioning, which patrols changed shifts at which intervals. Her knowledge spoke of infrastructure, of systems operating beneath the Dominion's notice. The resistance wasn't some desperate band of rebels. It was a network with intelligence and resources. She led them toward a rusted metal door set flush with the alley wall. The entrance looked like countless other maintenance accesses throughout the sector. Sarah produced a keycard from her pocket, the gesture casual. The lock clicked open with a sound barely audible over distant machinery. Behind them, the marketplace continued its commerce, unaware that directly beneath its bustling activity, alternative pathways existed. The door revealed steep, concrete steps descending into darkness. Cool air washed upward, carrying the scent of damp concrete and ozone. Sarah didn't hesitate, descending without checking if they followed. Her certainty was its own persuasion. This was the point of no return. The moment trust became necessary survival currency. Cale felt Aaliyah's hand tighten in his. The Yan girl showed no fear, only intensified awareness. She projected calm toward both of them, a subtle emotional current that steadied breathing and focused thoughts. Her ability apparently worked both ways, sensing emotions and influencing them. The Dominion had rightly feared what her people could accomplish if they ever organized. They descended into the gloom, the door sealing behind them with a final sounding thud. The staircase turned sharply, then opened into a narrow corridor lit by dim overhead strips. The walls showed moisture stains, the floor worn smooth by passing feet. This was no temporary hideout. This was established infrastructure. The resistance had been building while the marketplace above focused on daily survival. Sarah moved ahead without speaking, her footsteps silent on the concrete. The corridor branched several times, each choice made without hesitation. She knew this underground network intimately. Maps would be pointless here. Knowledge resided in muscle memory and experience. They passed storage rooms filled with supplies, their doors slightly ajar to reveal stacked containers and equipment. The air changed gradually, losing its industrial smell. They reached a heavier door with a keypad instead of a lock. Sarah input a code, her fingers moving too quickly to follow. The door slid open to reveal a larger space beyond. The hum of generators replacing the distant market noises. They had transitioned from danger to temporary sanctuary, moving downward while the world above continued its oblivious commerce. The basement complex felt like another world entirely, a secret landscape carved beneath the surface of ordinary life. The room felt like the inside of a machine that had stopped working years ago. Marcus Webb stood before a wall covered in star charts and security diagrams, his face showing the texture of someone who'd made too many hard calls. The storage bay hummed with low-power equipment, the air smelling of old electronics and recycled oxygen. Maps covered every flat surface, some showing Dominion patrol routes, others marking resistance safe houses that no longer existed. Webb turned slowly. His eyes held the flat acceptance of someone who'd already lost everything worth losing. "Nobody gets off this rock, son. Not anymore." The words carried no drama, only fact. He gestured toward a schematic of the planetary defense grid. Orbital blockade went active 6 hours ago. Nothing lifts off without Dominion clearance. Total control required total restriction. History showed that authoritarian regimes always sealed exits before tightening internal controls. Cale's hand went unconsciously to his pocket, where the navigation module rested. The crystal felt suddenly useless against such comprehensive lockdown. No amount of navigational skill could bypass a full planetary quarantine. The Dominion had learned from previous rebellions. You don't chase fugitives through space when you can simply trap them on the ground. Webb noticed the movement. "That what you bought from Zorax? Navigation crystal?" He didn't wait for confirmation. "Let me see it." His tone suggested he already knew what Cale carried. The Resistance commander's fingers were surprisingly gentle as he took the crystal. He held it to the light, examining its internal structure. "This isn't navigation data." The statement changed everything. The crystal contained military secrets instead of star charts. Battle plans, security codes, troop movements, everything the Dominion wanted to keep hidden. Webb's expression tightened. They locked the planet down because of this. Not because of the girl. Because someone stole their playbook. The revelation recontextualized everything. The increased patrols, the human inquiries, the sudden interest in solo operators. All connected to this stolen intelligence. Cale had been carrying the reason for the lockdown in his pocket. The navigation module purchase had been cover for something far more dangerous. Zorax must have known, using the transaction to move the crystal while Dominion attention focused on the Yan. The merchant had played a deeper game than anyone realized. Webb placed the crystal on a table between them. Its blue light seemed to pulse faintly. This could break their grip on half a dozen systems if it reaches the right people. The Resistance commander's voice remained level, but his eyes showed the first spark of something beyond resignation. The blockade isn't just containment. It's their attempt to prevent this information from becoming weaponized against them. The storage bay felt suddenly smaller, the maps on the walls transforming from records of defeat to potential battle plans. Every marked patrol route, every noted security post, they all became variables in a new equation. The crystal's presence changed the Resistance from fugitives to strategic players. Their isolation turned from prison to opportunity. Webb's hand rested near the crystal without touching it. They think they've contained the problem. They don't realize the problem was already walking among them. His gaze shifted to Cale, then to Aaliyah. "You didn't just buy a slave. You acquired the key to their defeat. The Dominion made one mistake. They underestimated what happens when desperate people get their hands on real leverage." Admiral Draal's name arrived before him like the taste of ozone before lightning. His reputation wasn't built on isolated acts of cruelty, but on systematic efficiency. The Aryan Prime genocide had been documented across 7 sectors, not as passion or rage, but as clinical procedure. Historical analysis shows that regimes often assign their most brutal operators to protect their most valuable secrets. Draal's personal presence on this backwater world signaled the crystal's significance far exceeded initial estimates. Webb's maps suddenly seemed inadequate. The Resistance commander's intelligence hadn't accounted for Draal's direct involvement. Patrol patterns on the wall charts shifted from routine security to deliberate hunting patterns. The Admiral didn't delegate high-stakes operations. His command ship hung in orbit like a blade poised above the planet, its shadow stretching across their dwindling options. Boots echoed in the streets above them. Not the random scuffling of market guards, but the synchronized tread of trained troops. Draal's methods involved systematic sector sweeps, grid by grid, building by building. His forces moved with mechanical precision, leaving no alley unchecked, no basement unsearched. Their approach was inevitable as weather, and just as unstoppable. The storage bay's relative safety transformed into potential trap. Their underground position offered concealment but limited escape routes. Webb's resistance cell had chosen this location for its isolation, but now that isolation worked against them. The single entrance that had seemed secure now represented a single point of failure. The maps on the walls showed no hidden tunnels, no emergency exits they hadn't already considered. Cale checked the charge on a borrowed blaster. The weapon felt foreign in his hands, its balance different than his trusted sidearm. The absence of his own firearm left him feeling uneven, like leaning on a wall that wasn't there. He positioned himself near the entrance, his body angled to cover both the door and Aaliyah's position across the room. Webb activated silent alarms throughout the basement network. Small lights glowed red on his control panel, each representing a sensor tripped by advancing troops. The Resistance had planted these devices during years of operation, creating an early warning system that now flickered to life. The pattern showed concentric circles closing around their position. Aaliyah stood perfectly still near the crystal's resting place. Her head tilted slightly, eyes losing focus. Yet empathy operated on levels beyond conventional senses. She felt the approaching soldiers not as individuals but as a wave of focused intent. Their emotions reached her before sound or vibration. Cold professionalism mixed with simmering fear of disappointing their commander. The first sensor alarm flashed silently. Troops had entered the industrial sector directly above them. Their movements created emotional ripples that Aaliyah could trace like footsteps in wet sand. She sensed their methodical progress, the way they cleared each building with practiced efficiency. Their search pattern showed military training rather than random searching. Webb's hand hovered over a demolition charge trigger. His face showed the calculation of someone weighing options against terrible consequences. The charge could seal the entrance but would also trap them underground. The Resistance had prepared for this scenario, but preparation didn't make the decision easier. Aaliyah's breathing changed. She turned toward the ceiling as if she could see through concrete and steel. "They know we're here," she said quietly. Her voice held no panic, only certainty. The emotional signature of the troops had shifted from general search to specific focus. They detected something: heat signatures, energy readings, some clue that narrowed their attention to this exact location. The storage bay's lights flickered once, then stabilized. Draal's forces operated with electronic warfare capabilities far beyond standard troops. Their approach wasn't just physical. It involved systematic disruption of communications and sensors. Webb's control panel showed 3 more alerts in rapid succession. Cale tightened his grip on the blaster. The weapon felt slightly more familiar now, its weight distribution becoming part of his awareness. He positioned himself between the door and Aaliyah, his body angled for both defense and response. The storage bay's confined space offered limited tactical options, but he'd fought in worse conditions. Aaliyah's hand went to her temple. The concentrated intensity of the approaching soldiers created pressure in her mind. She felt their commander's influence like a cold wind pushing them forward. Draal's reputation for punishing failure made his troops more afraid of disappointing him than of any physical danger. This fear drove their thoroughness, their relentless attention to detail. The first sound reached them, dull thuds against the street above. Heavy boots moving with purpose rather than patrol. The noise pattern suggested coordinated positioning around their location. They weren't searching anymore. They were preparing for entry. Aaliyah closed her eyes, her breathing slowing to something deeper than sleep. The Resistance fighters around her tensed, their hands tightening on weapons. She didn't project false bravery or manufactured courage. That wasn't how Yan empathy worked. Instead, she found the small sparks of resolve already burning within each person and gave them oxygen. The veteran who remembered why he first picked up a weapon. The young recruit thinking of family back home. The technician who believed in something beyond survival. She amplified what already existed, turning embers into flame. The Dominion troops outside faltered in their advance. Their synchronized movements broke rhythm as confusion rippled through their ranks. These soldiers operated on fear compliance, terror of disappointing drawl outweighing fear of death. Their training didn't account for opposition that fought with something beyond desperation. Military psychologists have documented how emotional states spread in high-stress situations like viruses, affecting group coordination and decision-making. The troops encountered something their drills never covered: opponents who believed they would win. Aaliyah's body swayed slightly where she stood. A thin line of blood traced from her nose down to her lip. She didn't wipe it away. The energy required for this projection drained her physically, each amplified emotion costing her own vitality. Her people had rarely used their abilities this way. Such large-scale projection risked permanent damage. The Yan had always been pacifists, their empathy used for healing and understanding. This weaponization went against their deepest teachings, but survival sometimes demanded terrible adaptations. The resistance fighters moved with new coordination. Their shots found targets they'd been missing moments before. A technician who'd never fired a weapon took down 2 advancing soldiers with precise shots. A wounded fighter rose from behind cover, his movement steady despite his injury. They covered each other's movements without shouting commands, operating with instinctual synchronization. The emotional connection Aaliyah forged created a combat efficiency they hadn't possessed minutes earlier. Webb watched the change with grim acceptance. His fighters were suddenly more than they'd been, their limitations overcome by shared resolve. The storage bay, which had felt like a tomb moments before, transformed into a defensive position with possibilities. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were fighting back with purpose that went beyond mere survival. The Dominion troops hesitated outside, their confidence shaken by opponents who fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Aaliyah's knees buckled slightly. Kale moved to support her, but she shook her head without opening her eyes. The projection needed to continue. She sensed the troops regrouping outside, their officers trying to restore discipline through threats and commands. The emotional warfare created a bubble of space around their position, buying precious minutes they desperately needed. Each second cost her more energy, her breathing becoming labored. The resistance used the reprieve to improve their defenses. They barricaded doors that had been left open, set up overlapping fields of fire, and distributed remaining ammunition with calm efficiency. The fear that had gripped them earlier transformed into focused determination. They moved like parts of a single organism, each action supporting the whole. The Yan empathy had given them not courage but clarity, the understanding that they were already committed, and only forward movement remained. Draal's response came through the troops' sudden withdrawal. They fell back from the entrance in coordinated retreat, their movements too orderly to suggest defeat. Aaliyah's eyes snapped open, her connection breaking. She gasped for air, blood now flowing freely from her nose. "They're sealing us in," she managed, her voice raw. The troops weren't leaving. They were creating containment perimeter. The emotional signature she sensed from above shifted from combat focus to systematic preparation. They intended to bury the problem rather than solve it. Heavy machinery sounds echoed through the ceiling as demolition equipment moved into position. Jake Morrison's ship waited in a concealed hangar 2 levels down, its hull scarred from countless unrecorded journeys. The smuggler himself leaned against the landing strut, cleaning his nails with a combat knife. He watched their approach without interest, his eyes calculating weight, risk, and potential profit in one glance. His vessel represented one of maybe 3 remaining routes off-world that might bypass the blockade. The other 2 belonged to captains who'd already doubled their prices and tripled their conditions. "You're the human who bought the Yan," Morrison said. His voice held no accusation, only assessment. The knife continued its methodical cleaning. "Draal's got 6 cruisers in high orbit and shoot-on-sight orders. My risk assessment needs compelling data." He didn't ask why they needed passage. That didn't interest him. Only the cost-benefit analysis mattered. Kale placed the crystal on a cargo crate between them. Its blue light pulsed softly in the hangar's gloom. "Military secrets," he said, "including Dominion troop deployments and security codes for half their forward bases." He didn't mention the war crimes evidence. That would come later if needed. Morrison's knife stilled. His eyes focused properly for the first time. Smugglers operate in conflict zones because moral ambiguity creates profit opportunities. They transport refugees alongside black market goods, medicines with illegal tech, sometimes helping and exploiting within the same journey. The crystal represented something different, leverage that could be sold multiple times to multiple buyers. Proof? Morrison's question was simple, practical. He needed verification before risking his ship and life. Webb activated a portable viewer, showing encrypted data streams from the crystal. Battle plans, communication logs, execution orders signed by High Command. The evidence was systematic, comprehensive, damning. Morrison watched without expression, but his breathing changed slightly. The information wasn't just valuable, it was transformative. The smuggler's network offered options his competitors couldn't match. He had silent running routes past Dominion patrols, blind spots in their sensor coverage, and contacts at neutral stations who asked fewer questions. Each path carried different risks. Some involved dodging minefields, others required bribing officials. All demanded perfect timing. His knowledge was the real product being negotiated. "I'll take you to the Alliance listening post at Beta Serpentis," he said finally. The knife disappeared into its sheath. "But I get 40% of whatever political capital this generates. My contacts will broker the information to resistance groups, neutral systems, anyone who will pay in weapons or influence." His terms were specific, professional. He wasn't interested in being a hero, only in being well compensated for exceptional risk. The agreement felt less like alliance and more like business transaction. Morrison would transport them because the potential payoff justified the danger. His moral compass pointed toward survival, with credits as its true north. Yet in conflicts, such pragmatic arrangements often achieve what idealism cannot. The smuggler's vessel might succeed where righteous vessels would be detected and destroyed. Cale nodded acceptance. The terms were terrible but necessary. Their alternatives had narrowed to this single option. The freighter's engines began cycling up, their low hum vibrating through the hangar floor. Morrison moved toward the boarding ramp, his manner efficient now that decisions were made. He called out coordinates to his first mate, the numbers sounding like financial calculations. The ship's interior smelled of ozone and old sweat. Cargo nets secured mysterious containers against the walls. Crew members moved with the tired competence of people who'd run too many blockades. This wasn't a warship or a refugee transport. It was a specialized tool for moving valuable things through dangerous space. Their addition to its cargo represented both opportunity and existential risk. Morrison took the pilot's seat without ceremony. His hands moved across controls with unconscious familiarity. "Strap in tight," he said. "Drell's interceptors patrol the upper atmosphere like hungry sharks. We'll need to ride a radiation burst from the northern magnetic pole to mask our engine signature." The plan was audacious, relying on natural phenomena rather than technology to evade detection. The hangar doors began sliding open overhead. Stars became visible through the widening gap, their patterns unfamiliar in this sector. The freighter lifted on silent repulsors, its movements precise despite its battered appearance. Morrison's voice remained calm as he described their exit strategy, each word measured against potential consequences. The orbital blockade waited above them, its sensors sweeping space with mechanical patience. Their only advantage was that nobody expected anyone to attempt departure from this location through these specific atmospheric conditions. The freighter angled upward, its engines building to operational pitch. The jump to light speed separated them from immediate danger, the stars stretching into streaks of white fire before vanishing into the blue tunnel of hyperspace. The freighter's interior hummed with a different energy now, the constant threat of pursuit temporarily muted. In this artificial twilight, the frantic pace of survival gave way to quieter contemplation. The sharp smell of ozone and heated metal lingered, but the air felt easier to breathe. Aaliyah sat with her back against a cargo container, her knees drawn up to her chest. The blood had been wiped from her face, but faint traces remained under her nostrils. She watched the swirling blue light outside the viewport, her expression unreadable.
"My people believed violence only creates more violence," she said quietly.
Her voice held no judgment, only a deep weariness. "We thought understanding could disarm conflict where weapons only escalated it." Her hands rested on her knees, palms upward in a gesture that might have been peaceful in another context. Now they just looked empty. The Yan philosophical tradition ran deep, their culture built around mediation and emotional connection. They had served as negotiators during sector disputes, their empathy allowing them to find common ground where others saw only opposition. This legacy made her actions in the warehouse fundamentally dissonant. Pacifist philosophies throughout history have struggled with the reality of self-defense. The theoretical purity of nonviolence fractures when confronted with immediate threat to innocent lives. Alia's people had never developed combat training or defensive strategies. Their survival plan had been diplomatic immunity and demonstrated harmlessness. The Dominion had exploited this vulnerability systematically, destroying them precisely because they posed no physical threat. "I use their fear as a weapon," she said, her gaze still fixed on the hyperspace tunnel. "I turned their own emotions against them. My ancestors would see that as corruption." The weight of this betrayal seemed to settle on her shoulders. Her cultural identity had been built around healing and connection, not manipulation and coercion. The emergency had forced her to use her gift in ways that felt like desecration. Kale watched her from across the compartment. He'd seen similar conflicts before, ideals meeting impossible choices in dark places. "Adaptation isn't abandonment," he said. His voice was quieter than usual, the words measured. "Your people's values kept them alive for generations. Now different values might keep you alive. Neither choice is wrong. They're just responses to different threats." He didn't offer empty reassurance. The truth was messier than that. Survival sometimes demanded actions that contradicted deeply held beliefs. The important thing wasn't maintaining purity, but understanding why compromises became necessary. His own journey from mercenary to protector represented similar adaptations, each choice reshaping his identity without erasing its core. Alia's empathy would have sensed the truth behind his words. He wasn't justifying her actions so much as contextualizing them. The Yan had failed because they couldn't adapt to the Dominion's brutality. Her actions, however painful, represented evolution rather than betrayal. The philosophical conflict would continue, but it no longer felt like failure. The first warning shot flashed past their viewport. The Dominion vessel hailed them, demanding immediate surrender. Morrison ignored the communication, instead pushing the engines to maximum output. The freighter shuddered with the strain, its aging frame protesting the sudden acceleration. They had delivered their message. Now they had to survive long enough to see its impact. Alia focused her mind toward the pursuing ships, her consciousness expanding beyond the freighter's hull. This level of projection exceeded anything her people had ever attempted. Her training involved subtle emotional sensing, gentle influence during negotiations. This was different. A full-scale assault on electronic systems and organic minds simultaneously. Modern warfare often blends psychological and electronic disruption, creating confusion that technology alone cannot achieve. Her empathic gift became weaponized on a scale neither side had anticipated. Blood traced thin lines from her nose down to her chin. She made no move to wipe it away. The strain showed in the trembling of her hands where they rested on the console. Each Dominion sensor array she touched with her mind required sustained concentration. She projected false readings, ghost signatures, and system errors into their networks. The effort drained her physically, each manipulated signal costing her own energy reserves. Morrison's ship approached the moon's radiation belt. The natural interference provided cover, but not enough against determined pursuit. Alia amplified the chaos, feeding distorted sensor data to the chasing vessels. Their responses became increasingly erratic. One ship fired on a phantom signature that didn't exist. Another altered course abruptly to avoid a collision with nothing. The coordinated pursuit broke into confused individual actions. The lunar surface churned beneath them. Fine gray dust rose in thick clouds as their thrusters disturbed the ancient regolith. Morrison flew lower than safety protocols allowed, using the dense particulate as visual cover. The dust particles interacted with sensor beams, creating additional false echoes that Alia could manipulate further. She turned the moon's environment into an extension of her projection, each dust cloud becoming another lying mirror for their pursuers. Dominion communications channels erupted with confused reports. Ships reported multiple targets where only one existed. Tactical officers argued about which contacts were real. The psychological pressure of potentially firing on friendly vessels made them hesitate at critical moments. Alia sensed their growing frustration and fear, emotions she subtly amplified to disrupt their decision-making. The disciplined military formation dissolved into scattered units operating without coordination. The freighter reached the rendezvous point where Jake's smaller vessel waited. Its running lights were dimmed to near invisibility. Transfer under these conditions was dangerously unstable. The two ships maintained formation while lunar dust swirled around them like a manufactured storm. Kale guided Aaliyah toward the airlock, her steps unsteady from the mental exertion. She maintained the projection even as they crossed between vessels, her focus never wavering. Jake's ship was built for stealth, its profile slim and sensor-resistant. They sealed the airlock behind them just as Morrison's freighter broke away, drawing pursuit toward the moon's pole. The smaller vessel dropped into a deep canyon, its engines barely whispering against the rock walls. Aaliyah finally released her mental grip on the Dominion sensors. The sudden cessation left her gasping, blood now flowing freely from her nose and ears. The lunar surface receded below them as Jake pushed the engines to maximum safe thrust. Escape velocity came gradually, the moon's gravity reluctantly releasing its hold. Behind them, the Dominion ships continued their confused search through the dust clouds, firing occasional shots at shadows and sensor ghosts. The distraction had created just enough confusion for their escape. The blue tunnel of hyperspace enveloped them, cutting off the view of their narrow escape. The transition felt less like victory and more like temporary reprieve. They had survived through unprecedented use of her abilities, but the cost remained unmeasured. Their surrender was strategic rather than actual. They allowed themselves to be detected and captured, the ship's systems powered down to non-threatening levels. Dominion boarding parties found them waiting calmly in the airlock, hands visible and empty. This approach bypassed external defenses that would have vaporized any aggressive approach. The tactic relied on Draal's predictable response. He would want prisoners for interrogation and public display, not instant casualties. Admiral Draal awaited them on the command bridge. He stood before the main view screen, his uniform perfectly pressed, his expression showing cool satisfaction. The air carried the scent of filtered oxygen and sterilized metal. His confidence was tangible, radiating from his still posture and measured breathing. He had prepared this moment, calculating every psychological advantage. Marcus Stone stood beside Draal's command chair. His body was present, but his eyes were absent, vacant like windows into an empty room. The resistance leader moved when directed, responded to quiet commands, but showed no independent thought. Draal had transformed him into demonstration piece, living proof of Dominion dominance. The psychological impact was, deliberate, showing a broken hero undermined resistance, morale more effectively than simply killing. Studies of authoritarian regimes show that displaying control over victims serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates power to opponents while reinforcing compliance among followers. Marcus represented not just a captured enemy but a conquered will. His empty gaze suggested complete psychological dismantling, the total victory Draal wanted to project. The message to any watching was clear. Resistance ends in subjugation, not martyrdom. Kale felt the weight of this psychological warfare. His own resolve faltered for a moment, seeing their most determined leader reduced to automation. The bridge crew worked quietly around them, their occasional glances at Marcus carrying mixed reactions, some satisfaction, some unease. Draal's victory felt absolute in that moment, his control seemingly unbreakable. Then Aaliyah's breathing changed. She focused on Marcus, her head tilting slightly. Her empathic senses reached past the conditioned surface, past the blank eyes and mechanical movements. She sensed something buried deep beneath the conditioning, a core of awareness that had resisted complete erosion. The Dominion's methods were thorough but not infallible. They could control actions but not entirely extinguish consciousness. This awareness shifted everything. The operation transformed from desperate rescue to strategic opportunity. Marcus wasn't just a prisoner to recover. He was intelligence to reclaim, a witness to Draal's methods who might still provide crucial information. His conditioned state might even offer advantages, allowing access to secured areas without suspicion. Draal smiled, interpreting their silence as defeat. He gestured toward Marcus. As you can see, we restore order even among the most disordered minds. The pronouncement was meant to finalize his victory, to cement their psychological defeat. But the revelation of Marcus's hidden awareness changed the equation completely. They weren't confronting absolute control anymore. They were facing a system with flaws they might exploit. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency around them. Display screens showed status reports from across the ship, all indicating normal operations. The crew maintained professional focus, their movements precise and disciplined. But beneath this surface of perfect control, Aaliyah's sensing had revealed the first hairline fracture in Dral's authority. The confrontation was no longer about overwhelming force against impossible odds. It was about finding the weak point in seemingly solid armor. The bridge lighting flickered for one critical second, a power fluctuation from the ongoing firefight elsewhere on the ship. In that fraction of a heartbeat, Marcus Stone moved. His hand, which had hung limp at his side, snapped upward. His fingers closed around the grip of Dral's own sidearm, the weapon holstered at the Admiral's hip. The motion was fluid, precise, driven by something deeper than conscious thought. Every movement must have sent waves of agony through his system. The Dominion's conditioning was designed to punish independent action with neural feedback. His face remained a mask, but a single muscle twitched near his eye. He had the weapon clear of the holster before Dral registered the movement. The barrel came up, centering on the Admiral's chest. The bridge crew froze, their hands hesitating over controls. This was the moment of decision. Vengeance was possible. Simple, clean, and deeply satisfying. One shot would end the architect of countless atrocities. The psychological satisfaction would be immense, a moment of retribution witnessed by his captors. Their shared uncertainty created a strange bond. Neither possessed absolute moral clarity anymore. They'd both made choices that contradicted their self-conceptions, adapting to survive in a universe that didn't reward rigid principles. This mutual recognition felt more authentic than any idealistic certainty could have been. The hyperspace tunnel continued its relentless progress around them. The freighter's engines maintained their steady hum, carrying them toward unknown destinations. The temporary safety of this journey offered no guarantees, only breathing space between confrontations. They would need to make more difficult choices ahead, each decision further reshaping who they became. Aaliyah's hand touched the viewport, her fingers tracing the path of a particularly bright energy streak. The motion was contemplative rather than fearful. She'd crossed a line back in that storage bay, but the crossing hadn't destroyed her. It had merely complicated her understanding of what survival required. The philosophical tension would remain, but it no longer paralyzed her with guilt. Cale watched the same lights reflected in her eyes. His own compromises felt less isolating when shared. They'd both lost something in that underground fight. Her philosophical certainty, his mercenary detachment. What remained was more complicated but also more human. The hyperspace journey stretched before them, its blue light washing over their silent communion. The Arcturus moon hung in the viewport like a pockmarked pearl, its surface scarred by abandoned mining operations. Morrison's freighter settled into low orbit, sensors scanning for the welcome signal that should have been flashing from the northern crater. Only silence answered their hails. The moon should have been sanctuary, a converted mining base with supplies, medical facilities, and rotation crews. Instead, the comms channel showed only dead air. Lisa Chin's emergency beacon activated automatically as they descended through the thin atmosphere. The device was standard resistance issue, designed to broadcast a secure recognition code upon approach to safe locations. Her pre-recorded voice emerged from the speakers, calm but urgent. All safe houses compromised. Betrayal from within the network. Do not attempt landing. Repeat, do not. The message cut abruptly to static, then resumed with different audio quality. If you're hearing this, they have me. But the fight continues. Tell Webb the nest has been. A scuffle sound, then the transmission ended permanently. The implications settled over the cabin like falling dust. Counter-resistance tactics throughout history show that authoritarian regimes prioritize infiltrating support networks. The Dominion hadn't just been chasing them, they'd been methodically dismantling the entire resistance infrastructure from the inside. Safe houses that had operated for years were now traps waiting to be sprung. The betrayal explained how Dral's forces had anticipated their movements, how they'd known which bases to monitor. Their planned refuge became another potential death sentence. Morrison immediately aborted the landing sequence, his hands moving across the controls with new tension. The freighter's nose lifted away from the moon's surface, engines whining with the sudden course change. Below them, the mining base looked dark and abandoned, but sensor scans revealed energy signatures consistent with powered-down weapon systems. The silence wasn't absence, it was ambush. Lisa's final message transformed from warning to rallying cry. Her calm delivery under capture, her effort to transmit crucial information even as she was taken. These details would circulate through remaining resistance cells. Martyr messages often achieve more than live broadcasts in galvanizing movements. Her sacrifice would fuel determination where safe houses had provided comfort. The loss of physical sanctuary created emotional resolve that no building could contain. Aliyah watched the moon recede through the viewport. Her hands rested on the communication console, fingers tracing the patterns of Lisa's final transmission. The Yan empathy allowed her to feel the resonance of the woman's courage, even through recorded audio. That bravery deserved amplification, not disappearance into static. She began recalibrating the beacon's frequency. Her movements were deliberate, her understanding of the technology seemingly instinctual. The device wasn't designed for broadcasting, but its power source could be redirected. She bypassed security protocols that would have required command authorization. The console sparked briefly, then stabilized at a higher energy output. Morrison started to protest, then stopped. He recognized what she intended. The beacon could reach beyond the compromised resistance network, its signal carrying further than standard communications. Lisa's warning could become a broadcast to everyone still fighting, and everyone who might join them. Aliyah's fingers moved across the controls with quiet certainty. The moon disappeared behind them as the freighter gained distance. Its silent surface no longer represented failed sanctuary, but became the launching point for something broader. The communications panel glowed with repurposed energy, ready to carry a new message across the void. The beacon hissed static for 3 heartbeats, then Aliyah's voice replaced the dead air. She spoke in clear common trade, her words carrying the slight melodic quality of her native language. I am Aliyah of Yan, daughter of Irian Prime, last survivor of my world. The identification wasn't mere introduction, it was claim and declaration combined. She was stating heritage where the Dominion claimed extinction. This announcement marked her specifically for retaliation. The Dominion had erased her people from records, declared their culture extinct, their memory eliminated. By naming herself and her origins, she became living contradiction to their official narrative. The broadcast would draw targeted response, not just general pursuit. They would want her silenced completely, her existence denied absolutely, her message expanded beyond personal survival. I speak to any who remember freedom, to any who resist oppression in small ways or large. The call wasn't for Yan survivors, she knew there were none. It was for every being living under Dominion control, every person who'd harbored quiet resistance. Historical conflicts often transform when localized struggles find broader resonance. Her words could unite disparate resistance cells or provoke overwhelming crackdown. She provided coordinates to a remote asteroid cluster in the Serpent sector. The location offered no tactical advantage, no resources, no strategic position. Its value lay in being overlooked and difficult to monitor. We will gather there in 3 cycles. Bring your proof of Dominion crimes. Bring your witnesses. The invitation created structure where there had been only desperation. Hope often thrives on specific meeting points rather than vague promises. The broadcast lasted 47 seconds. Morrison monitored Dominion communications channels as she spoke. Their chatter intensified immediately. Ships changed course, patrols redirected, priority alerts flashed across the network. The message had reached its intended audience and its intended opponent simultaneously. Success and danger increased in direct proportion. Aliyah finished speaking and cut the transmission. The console lights dimmed to standby mode. Her hands remained steady on the controls, but her breathing came quicker. The act of claiming her identity publicly felt both terrifying and liberating. She had stepped from hidden survivor to visible symbol in less than a minute. Morrison's sensors picked up the first Dominion patrol ship changing vector. Its new course would intercept them in approximately 6 minutes. The broadcast power signature had given their position away, just as they'd known it would. The gamble had been whether the message's value outweighed the exposure risk. Cale moved to the weapon locker. He distributed firearms to the crew with calm efficiency. The time for hiding had passed. They had chosen visibility, and now they would face the consequences. The freighter's shields activated with a low hum, their energy signature blooming on sensors. The Dominion ship appeared on the main screen, growing rapidly from distant speck to immediate threat. Its weapons powered up, targeting lasers painting their hull. Morrison's hands danced across the controls, preparing evasive maneuvers. The confrontation they'd avoided for so long was now inevitable. Aaliyah watched the approaching ship without fear. Her broadcast had accomplished its purpose. Across 7 sectors, beings were hearing her words, recording the coordinates, making decisions. The Resistance now had a focal point beyond mere survival. They had a gathering place and a voice that refused to be silenced. The cost would be high, but the alternative was permanent darkness. Instead, his arm swung left. The shot wasn't aimed at a person. The energy bolt struck the main security control panel beside the communication station. Sparks erupted in a shower of white light. The console smoked and died. Alarms immediately blared across the ship, their tones shifting from battle alert to system failure. Research into extreme duress situations shows that core values surface when conscious control is compromised. The choice between personal vengeance and strategic advantage reveals fundamental character. Marcus didn't fire again. He dropped the weapon, its metal clattering against the deck plates. His body shuddered violently, the after effects of overcoming the conditioning clearly ravaging his nervous system. But his work was done. The damaged console controlled the primary prisoner detention block. The shot triggered a cascade failure through the security network. Backup systems attempted to compensate, but the override protocols had been corrupted. Throughout the ship, cell doors slid open simultaneously. Dozens of them, from the high-security isolation chambers to the general holding areas. The sound was audible even on the bridge, the hiss of releasing pressure seals, the clang of metal doors hitting their stops. The ship's intercom crackled with confused reports. Guards shouted questions. Running footsteps echoed in corridors. The Dominion vessel ceased to be a prison ship. It became a battlefield. Former prisoners emerged from their cells disoriented but free. Some seized weapons from surprise guards. Others simply ran, creating chaos in the passageways. The carefully maintained order dissolved into frantic scrambling. The crew on the bridge looked to Drawl for commands, but the Admiral was still processing the sudden reversal. Cale moved immediately. He grabbed a fallen guard's rifle, his movements efficient. The strategic landscape had shifted completely. They were no longer captives in a controlled environment. They were combatants in a confused close-quarters fight where initiative mattered more than discipline. The ship's internal sensors showed conflicts erupting across multiple decks. The certainty of Dominion control had shattered in one calculated action. Drawl lay restrained on the deck, his uniform torn, breath coming in ragged bursts. 4 Resistance fighters held him down, their knees pressing into his shoulders and legs. The Admiral's eyes blazed with fury, but his body was immobilized. The air on the bridge still hummed with residual energy from disrupted systems, smelling of ozone and sweat. Cale stood over him, a charged rifle in his hands. The weapon felt heavy with possibility. One shot would end the butcher of Aryan Prime. The satisfaction would be immediate, visceral. Drawl's death would feel like justice distilled into a single moment. Every instinct honed by frontier survival said to eliminate the threat permanently. But Marcus Stone shook his head slowly. His voice emerged hoarse from disuse. A trial. The word hung in the charged air. The Alliance Tribunal. Let them hear the evidence. His eyes, once vacant, now held hard-won clarity. He understood that real justice required witnesses, not just vengeance. Transitional justice processes throughout history show that documented accountability serves rebellion better than retaliation. Public trials expose systemic crimes, turning isolated atrocities into evidence of pattern. Killing Drawl would make him a martyr to some, a statistic to others. Putting him on trial would make him evidence. The risk was substantial. Keeping Drawl alive meant transporting a high-value prisoner through hostile space. He would remain a constant security threat, his influence potentially reaching loyalists within their own ranks. Every moment he breathed represented potential disaster. The safe choice was the dead choice. Aaliyah placed her hand on Cale's arm. Her touch was light but certain. She felt the conflict within him, the desire for retribution warring with strategic thinking. Her empathy allowed her to sense the broader implications. His testimony could prevent future Aryan primes, she said quietly. The statement reframed the decision from punishment to prevention. They made the choice together. Drawl would be sedated, secured and transported to the neutral territories. The Alliance Tribunal operated under interstellar law, its proceedings broadcast across settled systems. Their evidence, the crystal's data, witness testimonies, now Dral himself, would become tools for building a case rather than weapons for exacting revenge. The decision transformed their status instantly. They were no longer fugitives evading capture. They became escorts transporting a prisoner to justice. This shift changed how other factions would perceive them. Neutral systems might offer assistance where they previously denied docking rights. The rebellion gained legitimacy through due process. Morrison began calculating routes to the nearest Alliance outpost. His navigation charts glowed with possible paths, each with different risk profiles. The journey would take them through contested space, but now they traveled as representatives of a growing coalition rather than desperate runners. Dral struggled against his restraints one final time before the sedative took effect. His eyes held pure hatred until they fluttered closed. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support. They had chosen the harder path, the one that required patience and faith in systems that had previously failed them. The captured Dominion vessel now became their transport. Its crew was secured in the brig they had so recently occupied. Irony hung thick in the recycled air. They would deliver Dral to justice in his own ship, a symbolic gesture that wouldn't be lost on the tribunal. Kale secured his rifle. The weight felt different now, less like a tool for killing, more like a symbol of restraint. They had crossed a threshold where survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant building something that could outlast the immediate conflict. The ship turned toward Alliance space, its course set for accountability rather than vengeance. Century Base moved at a different rhythm than the frontier worlds. The air carried the scent of filtered oxygen and polished metal, the halls silent except for the measured footsteps of officials. The council chamber's doors were heavy, soundproofed, designed for deliberation rather than urgency. Kale waited with the others in an antechamber, his boots feeling out of place on the smooth floor. This was politics, not survival, a game with different rules. The council operated through procedure. Each member represented a neutral system, their faces carefully neutral, their questions precise. They reviewed evidence with the calm detachment of beings who'd never faced a Dominion interrogation chamber. Political bodies throughout history have struggled with revolutionary evidence. It disrupts comfortable neutrality, forces uncomfortable choices. The crystal's data glowed on the main display, its contents methodically examined. Military deployment patterns, internal communications, execution orders. The evidence was systematic, undeniable. Tension built not through shouting but through silence. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Their decision would determine whether the resistance became legitimized rebellion or condemned insurgency. Sanctioned war meant access to supplies, safe passage through neutral space, diplomatic recognition. Condemnation meant continued isolation, hunted existence, slow starvation. The vote wasn't about justice, it was about practicality. Would supporting this rebellion stabilize the region or ignite wider conflict? Aliyah stood beside Kale, her presence a silent testament. She didn't speak unless questioned, her answers clear and measured. Her testimony carried weight not through dramatic delivery, but through quiet certainty. She described Yan culture's destruction not as tragedy, but as systematic elimination. The council listened, their professional masks occasionally flickering. Witness testimony often affects political calculations more than raw data. Numbers describe scale, but stories describe loss. The vote proceeded without ceremony. Each member activated their console, light patterns shifting across the overhead display. The process took less than a minute. The result glowed unanimous, green lights across the board. The resistance would receive provisional recognition, military aid, and protected status. The rebellion had become a coalition. The decision transformed their standing instantly. Uniformed attendants brought data slates with logistics information, supply routes, communication protocols. The room's atmosphere changed from tense waiting to organized activity. They were no longer fugitives seeking shelter. They were partners in a coordinated effort. Kale found himself appointed liaison between human and Yan interests. The role made sense. He understood frontier operations, had worked with multiple species, carried credibility from his actions. But it meant paperwork instead of piloting, Negotiations instead of navigation. His hand went unconsciously to his hip where his weapon usually rested. The space felt empty. The council members departed with quiet efficiency, their roles complete. The chamber emptied until only their group remained. Aliyah looked toward the star charts displayed on the wall. The map showed known space, Dominion territories, neutral zones. Their next movements would be coordinated, supported, part of something larger. The isolation of their early struggles felt distant already. Kale accepted the data slate from an aide. The screen showed deployment schedules, meeting times, diplomatic protocols. His freighter waited in the main hangar, its navigation systems likely being upgraded even now. The journey ahead involved different dangers: political maneuvering, alliance building, strategic patience. The work would be slower, less immediate, but potentially more lasting. He looked toward the hangar bay, already calculating first steps. The Dominion measures strength and control and fear. They see compassion as vulnerability, mercy as failure, but true resilience emerges from connection, not isolation. The rebellion now spreads through shared conviction, not imposed obedience. This movement began with discreet gestures: a weapon surrendered, a prisoner protected. Small risks multiplied across star systems, creating momentum that fleets cannot destroy. The war will grind on for years, casualties mounting on both sides, but the foundation has shifted irrevocably. Victory will be claimed not by the most powerful, but by those who remember why they fight. Hope persists where empathy outlasts brutality. The outcome remains unwritten,